Hey everybody, welcome to Random Reactions. We haven't done one of these episodes in a while, and I try to stray away from politics too much on this channel. I'm first and foremost a Christian. I am a conservative, and I do get into politics and stuff in my own personal time. But this channel, basically, for the most part, I want to talk about my faith and how that relates to the music that I react to and other stuff on here. But anyway, I do want to take the moment to address something politically that just came up this past week, which is also a spiritual issue that relates to me personally, because I was recently accused of this same thing. And so I want to go ahead and address it and talk about where the people criticizing this are right and where they're wrong. For those of you that aren't aware, it is Easter weekend as I'm recording this, and the other day, they had a national prayer breakfast with President Trump and some of his spiritual advisors. And at that prayer breakfast, Paula White, who is an evangelical leader and a pastor, who, for the record, I disagree with a lot of her theology. I'll just say that right off the bat. I disagree with her on a lot of issues. And honestly, as President Trump explores his faith, you bring up the question, is he a Christian or not? He claims to be a Christian. He reads the Bible. He's talked historically about how he went to church in his youth and went to Sunday school. But from the things that he says, I honestly believe that he is what I would refer to as a young Christian. Not young in age, but young in his faith. Maybe he's been going to church his whole life, or on and off his whole life. He once made a reference to going to church on special occasions like Easter and Christmas and stuff like that growing up, but really doesn't go regularly every Sunday. And of course, as you get into politics and you move to Washington and all that kind of stuff, and you get out in the world, him being a businessman and stuff, a lot of times people like that, they get involved with other stuff, and then they find they don't have time for church. And it hurts their faith because they don't really get a good in-depth understanding of it. They just know the very basics, and sometimes the basics is enough to save you, to give you salvation. But when you go and talk about it and try to witness to others, a lot of times you misspeak. As even those of us who have studied the Bible our entire lives, like myself, and went to Bible college and studied it and became a pastor, that sort of stuff, sometimes we misspeak. And I encourage my congregation where I'm a pastor, if you ever catch me misspeaking or saying something that you disagree with or misquoting something, let me know. And I encourage you to do the same thing, to go ahead and comment down below in the comments section and let me know so I can correct the record. Because I am not I'm human, I'm not perfect, I am infallible, and the ultimate authority is God and His Bible. So if I or Trump or anybody else or Paula White or any preacher or any non-Christian or Christian tells you something that disagrees with what the scriptures actually say, confront us on it. Let us know. And then if we're wrong, if we're intellectually and as far as God is concerned, honest about it, then we will correct the record and admit where we're wrong and correct it so that we don't mislead people. That being said, she compared President Trump to Jesus. And people were just going crazy over it. What she actually said was she went ahead and described Jesus and the trials that he faced leading up to his arrest, crucifixion, and eventual resurrection, to what he went through with what is commonly referred to as the witch hunt, where politically all these leaders went out after President Trump since he declared his intention to run for president of the United States back in 2015, going into the 2016 election.
Mr. President, no one has paid the price like you have paid the price.
So true.
It almost cost you your life. You were betrayed and arrested and falsely accused. It's a familiar pattern that our Lord and Savior showed us. But it didn't end there for him, and it didn't end there for you. God always had a plan. On the third day, he rose, he defeated evil, he conquered death, hell, and the grave. And because he rose, we all know that we can rise. And sir, because of his resurrection, you rose up. Because he was victorious, you were victorious. And I believe that the Lord said to tell you this. Because of his victory, you will be victorious in all you put your hand to.
And so from that moment, there have been, honestly, this is just a historical fact, there have been a lot of attacks against him politically. People have, there's been, of course, the impeachment proceedings. He's been accused of anything and everything by anybody and everybody and their brother and sister and cousin. And some of it you might think might have some merit to it. And some of it just honestly is just downright laughable. Some of the stuff he's been accused of, you look at the facts and you go back and examine the allegations, and they just don't hold water. They don't make a bit of sense. Now, that being said, I'm not defending President Trump. I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying he's innocent of all these charges, but they haven't been proven against him, which is why he's been impeached technically, but he hasn't been removed of office because the one part of the government found him guilty and impeached him, but the Senate didn't remove him. I guess it's a House impeached him, but the Senate didn't actually remove him. So they disagreed. The two forms of government there, the House and the Senate, disagreed over it. And so it's a thing of contention. And as we went through the 2016 election where he was elected, and then the 2020 election, which was contested very famously, and we had the January 6th, 2021 situation, and all the fallout from that. And honestly, you go back and watch the video from that, and people accuse him of instigating a riot and a insurrection. But if you actually listen to the speech, word for word, what he said, he very clearly said, I encourage you to go down and peacefully protest. Repeatedly, over and over again. He never said to riot. He never said to break in. He never said to do property damage. He never said to harm anybody. In fact, he said the opposite. He said, do not harm any of the guards, the police, the people doing their jobs. He said they're doing their jobs. So don't attack them. Just go down and peacefully protest. Let your voice be heard.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
And so people just went insane over that and tried to impeach him over it. Obviously, that was bogus. That's just a historical fact. Okay, now, setting that aside, there was all these other things they've been going after him over. There's the sexual assault allegations, and some of them that really was judged against him in a court of law. And so technically he was found liable for these things. But when you go and study those in depth, even those don't hold water. And it makes no sense that this court actually affirmed those. Some of the allegations just don't fit with the historical facts of the case. That all being said, that is what you call persecution. Now, it's not the same as persecuting somebody for their faith. They're persecuting him for his politics. But it is a form of persecution. So in that sense, you can compare Trump to Jesus and the fact that Jesus was persecuted and he was persecuted. Was it exactly the same thing? When you're comparing him to Jesus in that sense, you don't want to compare you can compare apples to apples, which is like Jesus went through this and you went through this exactly the same way. That's apples to apples. That's not the case here. Trump to Jesus is not apples to apples. You can compare apples to bananas or apples to oranges, but because they're both fruits. Say this happened to him, this happened to you, and they're similar but not exactly the same thing. And that is basically what Jesus did himself with all of his parables. He would tell a story that wasn't exactly the same thing as what he was trying to illustrate is going on in heaven with God the Father and his relationship with us, comparing it, for example, with the story of the prodigal son. It's a father and his son. His son runs away from home, spends all his money in riotous living, and then comes back. And after he squandered all his riches and his wealth, and he's destitute and helpless, and he comes to his senses and realizes, I've made a mistake. I need to go back to my father, but will he forgive me? I wouldn't forgive myself, and so I'm afraid to go back home to my father. But when he does finally go back home to his father, he says, Father, please forgive me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't deserve to be called your son anymore. So I will let you disown me. I won't be your son. Not really let you, but I mean, I will understand if you disown me, and don't call me your son anymore, but at least let me be your servant. Let me go out and sleep in the barn and take care of the cattle and the horses and the sheep and the goats and all that kind of stuff and the pigs, and treat me as you would one of your hired servants. But the father said to him, I love you. You are still my son, and I forgive you. Not only that, but come home. I'm going to throw a huge party for you, a huge banquet, to show the whole world that you are my son. I love you, and welcome home. And have everybody celebrate because my son who was lost is now found. You compare that to Jesus and what's going on in heaven between God and us, as Jesus was doing in the parable. That's comparing apples, what's going on in the spirit world between God and us, to oranges, what happened between the father and the prodigal son. They're both fruits, but they're not exactly the same thing. The father wasn't God, and the son wasn't Jesus. Because Jesus, or even from that sense, it's a completely different fruit. But in the example he's given is not comparing the prodigal son to Jesus, but comparing us to Jesus, or comparing us to the prodigal son. See, that's where I misspeak. So if I don't correct myself, you got to correct those little flubs. But that's an unintentional flub, and those happen too. But anyway, comparing the prodigal son, and what Jesus was doing was comparing God's relationship to us, the same as sinners, as children of God who have left home and abandoned God, become enemies of God, as it talks about in the books of Romans. But yet, while we were enemies, he still loved us and sacrificed his son for us so that we could find salvation. That's what the father did for the prodigal son, this human father to this human son. Now, those weren't God and us, so it's not apples and apples, but it's apples and oranges. And that's the whole point of a parable, or a comparison, or a simile, or a metaphor. And so whenever you have somebody like myself that would get up in church on Sunday morning and give an illustration comparing something happening in our current modern times, especially something on the news, like something that would happen on the political landscape with somebody like President Trump, and then compare that to something that happened to Jesus or the disciples or the apostles, or something that happened in the scriptures, then that is not comparing apples to hand grenades, which is how everybody's acting, as if comparing to President Trump to Jesus in any sense is blasphemy. Obviously it's not, because God in the Bible compares us to Jesus all the time. In fact, Jesus compels us and commands us to compare ourselves to him. Now, when we compare ourselves to him, we have to realize we're not saying that we are Jesus, obviously. So if I personally were to compare Trump to Jesus, I would never in a million years try to insinuate that Trump was Jesus, or that anybody was Jesus, the second coming Jesus, or otherwise. So just throw that out the window. That's what everybody's accusing Paula White of doing, and that's what I was personally accused of doing. And they couldn't specify exactly when this happened, but they said, you have compared Trump to Jesus. And I said, did I? When was this? And they couldn't give me a specific date or even the topic of the sermon which I was talking about. And I was like, honestly, I don't remember saying anything like that, and I can't imagine myself saying something like that. You must have misunderstood, because number one, I don't believe that Trump is Jesus. I don't believe he's the Messiah. I don't think he's the second coming. I never would have dreamed of insinuating something like that. So I've obviously said something about Trump and compared it to something that happened to either Jesus or something that happened to one of the disciples or something like that in scriptures, and somebody misunderstood it. But anyway, I feel like that's what everybody's going on and on about Paula White today, her statement. Now, if you go back and look at what she actually said, did she say Trump was Jesus? No. Did she say Trump was the Messiah? No. Did she say he was the second coming? No. Did she say he was the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords? Did she say he was any kind of king or any kind of Lord? No. She just named some historical events that happened to Jesus and said those same things, very similar things, happened to you in a historical context. Now, she went on to say that because Jesus rose from the grave and he conquered over his persecution, that she believes that God was telling her that Trump was going to rise above his persecution as well, victorious. What's wrong with that? God tells us constantly in the scriptures that if we belong to Jesus, if we follow him, then we will rise victorious because he rose victorious. The scriptures are very clear that Jesus died and rose from the grave so that we also could die and then rise from the grave. And we would never face eternal damnation, eternal death. All we have to do is choose him. Now, if she were to transfer it to a spiritual level and say that he is the same as Jesus on a spiritual level, that would be an issue. Obviously, he's not. As I said before, I think he's a young Christian in his faith. There's a lot he doesn't understand about the scriptures and about the Bible. But I think he's trying. Honestly, I do. He's not the most spiritual president we've ever had by a long shot, but he is definitely a person who respects Christianity and respects evangelicals in particular. He considers himself an evangelical, Protestant. Specifically, what did he say he was? I think he said he was a Presbyterian in one interview. And so you can get down to theological differences between all the different denominations out there. I don't agree with everything that the Presbyterians believe. But as a wise man once said, in the essentials, unity, in the non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, charity. So as Christians, to label ourselves Christians, we have to agree on the very basics. And then there are, different theological issues that arise that we can disagree on and still consider ourselves brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, Trump, I think he has a lot to learn spiritually. And because of my disagreements with a lot of Paula White and the other leaders that he's been surrounding himself with, I disagree with their theology on a lot of issues. So I hope that he comes into contact with more solid, grounded spiritual leaders, such as Franklin Graham, who it just came out recently that Franklin Graham wrote him a letter after he made a comment about his faith. Somebody asked him if he's ever asked God for forgiveness. And he said, well, no. He said, I don't ask for forgiveness because I don't think about it that way. I just try to do my best and then trust God to handle all the details. And there's a sense of truth to that's how it works. But at the same time, it misses the point that we can't earn our salvation. We can't earn our way into heaven. He made a comment saying something about he wasn't sure if he would be able to earn his way into heaven. Well, I'll just tell you right now, the answer is no. President Trump will never earn his way into heaven. Not because he's any better or worse than anybody else, but because none of us, no human being, not even the most perfect person on this planet, could earn their way into heaven, because it doesn't work that way. The only way we can get to heaven is because Jesus already earned it for us, and all we have to do is accept it through his grace, through his love, his mercy, and his forgiveness. And we have to accept him in order to get that. And if I were to stand before the pearly gates after I die, and they ask me, why should I let you into heaven? The very second I start naming things that I've done and say, I did this, I did that, and so because of that, you should let me out into heaven. On that basis, I should immediately be disqualified from entering heaven, because I can't earn it. That's all rags. It's all filthy rags. All my good deeds. The only thing that I can say that can get me into heaven is, look, here, I got this ticket. I got this ticket to get into heaven free. It's a get out of jail free card like you have Monopoly. Jesus gave it to me. Jesus died on the cross for my sins, rose from the grave. And he said, if you believe in me, if you follow me, then I will lead you home. I am the way, the truth, and life, the only way to get to the Father. And the only way you can get to heaven is through me. And I am following Jesus. He gave me the ticket and said, come on in. So that's why I should get into heaven. And that's the same thing that I hope that somebody tells Donald Trump, because that's what he needs to hear to understand the true gospel. That goes for every single one of us. Now, obviously, he's far from perfect. He, as a Christian, he falls short in a lot of ways. So do I, in different ways than he falls short. But we all fall short, and it's not for us to judge each other, but for us to, when we see faults in each other, to try to encourage each other help each other to overcome them. And that's what Franklin Graham did recently when he wrote a letter to President Trump last fall, explaining in detail the gospel after he made that comment about trying to earn his way into heaven. And President Trump recently tweeted, apparently on his platform, Truth Social, about that letter and posted it on there. And so apparently it meant something to him that he remembered it and wanted to post it right before Easter. But anyway, he needs to surround himself with more people like that will lead him in the true way to get to heaven and help him to become more like Jesus, which is what I pray for him, because he's got a long way to go. But then again, so do I. So do we all. And so I think that should make it clear that anytime I personally refer to President Trump and compare him to Jesus, I'm not comparing him like apples to hand grenades. I'm not saying that he is Jesus. Obviously, he's not. I'm not saying he's a king like Jesus. Somebody was commenting, I saw on YouTube, I was watching these different videos, people reacting to this. Somebody referred to where he said in a speech the other day, I'm a king like Jesus. He said, how is it he phrased it? I can't even get a ballroom built. How's that for a king?
There are several No Kings protests planned across the country on Saturday as well. What are your thoughts on those?
What do they go? No kings?
No Kings.
I don't feel like a king. I have to go through hell to get stuff approved. A king would say, I'm not going to get this. A king would have never had the California mandate to even be talking to him. He wouldn't have to call up Mike Johnson and Thune and say, fellas, you got to pull this off, and after years we get it done. No, we're not a king. We're not a king at all. Thank you very much.
Obviously, he's making a joke. He's saying he's, if you read the context of what he's saying, he's not saying he's a king like Jesus. He's saying he's not. He's being sarcastic, saying, people are saying I'm a king like Jesus. Oh, if I'm such a king, if I'm so much like Jesus, then why can't I get a ballroom? Obviously, he's having a little bit of fun, telling a little joke. And honestly, anybody that listens to that comment and thinks that he's calling himself king is intellectually lying. There's just no other way to put it. It's intellectually dishonest. You're lying to yourself, or you're lying to each other, or lying to us. That is not what he said. That is not what he was trying to get across, and it's obvious to anybody that has ears. Just the same thing with the whole both sides thing that came up years ago that was been debunked over and over again, but it keeps coming up, where they had the protests on the one side and the other side about the removal of the statues down south in North Carolina, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, I think it was. But anyway, he said in the interview or in the press conference, that there were people on both sides, good people on both sides of the issue. The issue was the removal of the statues, not the issue of whether you hate the Jews or hate, black people or any other group of people. He wasn't saying there's both sides on the issue of that hatred, but he was saying, and he came right out in the very next, like 2 sentences later, within 30 seconds, he clarified that, and he said, I am not referring to the white supremacists or the neo-Nazis or the KKK or whatever the case may be. He said they are to be condemned.
That were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Robert E. Lee are not the same.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people. Neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest, and very legally protest, because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this, there are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country.
And then for the next 4 years, 8 years, and even still today, people are using that against him and saying that he refused to condemn the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. He did it in that very same speech, just 30 seconds after he made the initial statement that they were questioning. And so it's been debunked over and over again, and he's distanced himself from them over and over again. That's just an example, another example, where he's been accused of something that he did not say. He's been taken out of context. And that's what I believe is happening here. Paula White wasn't saying that President Trump was Jesus. She wasn't comparing him to Jesus the same way you would compare him and say that he is a king like Jesus, or he's the King of Kings. He's the second coming of Jesus, which is what everybody's insinuating. That's not what she was saying. Don't believe me. Don't take my word for it. Go back, look up the video, and watch it. Now, I will say that when people say stuff like that, it can easily be misunderstood, taken out of context. And so I don't think it was wise of her to phrase it the way she did there. It just didn't come across well. And anybody that gets up in public like that and says something that forcefully and that pointedly as she did, it's just asking for trouble. I would never do that. And when I bring up issues like that, I only compare him to Jesus in the same sense that I compare myself or anybody else to Jesus, the way that he tells us in the Bible that we should. We should all compare ourselves to Jesus, and we should all examine our hearts and see if there is any way that we fall short of perfection. Obviously, we're going to find, if we're honest with ourselves, we're going to find something. Before we take communion, we are commanded to examine our hearts, to examine ourselves. Every time we take communion as a Christian in church, we are told to examine ourselves, and if there's any place in our hearts where we fall short of the glory of God, we are to confess that to him, not to each other, not to anybody else necessarily. If you want to have an accountability partner that you can confess to and they can hold you accountable, that's a great thing to do. But what we're told to do in Scripture is confess those to God. If we have wronged somebody, then we go out and we try to make it right. If somebody has wronged us and we're holding a grudge against them, we are to forgive them. Otherwise, we're asking God in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us as we forgive those who trespass against us. If we don't forgive them, we are asking God not to forgive us. So if we want to be forgiven, we have to forgive as well. And so when we take communion, we're supposed to examine ourselves. And if there's any way we fall short, and if we're honest with each other, with ourselves, we know that we do. And so he's saying, compare yourself to me. Compare yourself to God. Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, is what Jesus said. And because we can't in this life, then we are constantly comparing ourselves to Jesus, discovering that we fall way short of the glory of God. We fall way short of the goal of being like Jesus. And so we are to try to make those changes in ourselves. Not in our neighbor, but in ourselves. And then we can help our neighbor. After we've already, taken as he said, take the beam out of your own eye, then you can help your neighbor with the speck that's in his eye. And so I compare myself to Jesus all the time. I compare everybody to Jesus all the time. It's what he commands us to do. And so just because somebody compares Jesus to Trump doesn't mean that they are saying that Trump is Jesus. And so I'm sorry for going on this long rant, but really it's just rubbed me the wrong way, particularly since I was accused of comparing Trump to Jesus. And this is the only example that I can think of as to where somebody could have heard something that I said and took it that way, is to where I maybe could have compared something that Trump was being accused of and compared it to persecution in some way. But, of course, Christians are persecuted all the time, all around the world. Jesus said, they persecuted me, and he said to the disciples, they are going to persecute you as well. He told us, his followers, he said, if they persecuted me, Jesus, then they are going to persecute you even more. That's what he said to us today. And so, yes, what she said about Jesus was persecuted, and so you were persecuted also. That's scriptural. That is true, historically and scripturally. When she said Jesus died and rose from the grave, and you also, after you die, if you belong to him, you will rise from the grave. That is historically and true that Jesus rose from the grave, and it is theologically true that because he rose from the grave, those of us who follow him and accept him will also rise from the grave and live forever. Now, if she were to say, because Jesus is the King of Kings and he's sitting on the throne in heaven, then you're also going to be the King of Kings and sit on the throne in heaven. Oh, that's crossing the line. That's blasphemy. You can't say that. Now you're not comparing apples to oranges. You're comparing apples to hand grenades. And if she said that, I would be one of the first ones to call it out. So I hope that clarifies and makes sense to everybody. Go ahead and comment down below if you would, what you think. Do you understand what I'm trying to get across here? Did I say it well? If not, what do you disagree with what I said? And maybe we can, in the comments, go back and forth, and maybe I can explain a little bit better if I didn't explain it properly. And if you have something to say that I realize I misspoke, or you might change my mind about something, then we'll go that way too. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. This is the Light Side channel, and we very rarely do episodes like this of random reactions. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we do the Light Side music reactions, where I react to different music that you guys recommend for the most part, and give my take on what the song means to me, what I get from it, how I enjoy the music or not, and how it relates on a spiritual level. I try to get that across too. And then also every once in a while we'll do an episode of the Light Side reaction reviews, where I react to a new movie trailer, or some kind of fan film or something like that comes out. But basically that's what this channel is. So if you enjoy my content, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so that you know whenever we add new content. Thank you guys for watching. Have a very, very blessed Easter. God bless you all. And may we all grow more and more to be like Jesus, so that when we do compare ourselves to him, we will recognize that we fall short. We will never in this life live up to the example that he calls us to be. But every day, let us try to be more and more like him. So that way, when he does finally return for us, he will say, "Welcome home, my good, faithful servant." And even though we weren't perfect in this life, he will make us perfect in the next. Thank you guys again for watching. We'll see you next time on the Light Side. Bye.